For a long time, I thought getting rich was simple. Make a lot of money. Buy the things I've always wanted. Get the nice house. Get the expensive car. Never have to worry about money again. That was the dream. And honestly, I think a lot of us have had that same dream at some point. Because when you don't have much money, it's easy to believe that money is the answer to almost everything. You see someone driving a Lamborghini and think they've made it. You see someone living in a huge house and think they've won. You see someone with millions of dollars in their bank account and think they must have figured life out. I used to think that way too, but then I learned about a man who had more money than I could even imagine, a man who could buy almost anything he wanted, a man who had billions of dollars, and somehow he didn't live the way I expected a billionaire to live. His name was Warren Buffett. And the more I learned about his story, the more I realized that I had completely misunderstood what being rich actually meant. Because Warren Buffett didn't become wealthy by trying to look wealthy. He became wealthy by doing something that almost nobody wants to do. He waited. He waited while everyone else wanted results immediately. He kept investing while everyone else chased quick money. He kept learning while everyone else chased trends. And most importantly, he understood something that I wish I had understood much earlier. Money isn't just about how much you have. It's about what you do with it. When I first heard about Buffett's story, I couldn't understand how someone could become one of the richest people in the world without living like they had something to prove. He wasn't constantly trying to show people how much money he had. He wasn't building his entire identity around expensive things. He didn't need everyone to know he was rich. And that made me curious, because if I suddenly had billions of dollars, I know exactly what I would want to do. At least, I thought I did. I'd buy the house. I'd buy the cars. I'd travel. I'd finally buy everything I'd spent years telling myself I couldn't afford. But then I started asking myself a different question. What if having money isn't about buying everything you want? What if real wealth is having the freedom to not need everything you want? That completely changed how I looked at money. Warren Buffett's story started long before the billions. He was born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1930. He didn't grow up with the kind of fortune that would eventually make him one of the richest people alive. But from a young age, Buffett had something unusual. He was fascinated by money, not just spending it, understanding it. He wanted to know how businesses worked. He wanted to know why people bought certain products. He wanted to understand how money could turn into more money. And while most kids were thinking about what they wanted to buy, Buffett was already thinking about how he could make money. He sold chewing gum. He sold Coca-Cola. He delivered newspapers. He found small ways to make money, and then looked for ways to grow what he had. And when I think about that now, there's something important about it. He didn't start with some giant opportunity. He started with what he had. That sounds obvious, but it's one of the hardest things for people to accept. We always think we need more before we can start. More money, more knowledge, more resources, more opportunities. We tell ourselves we'll start when everything is perfect. But Buffett started small, and he kept going. As he got older, his interest in investing became more serious. Eventually, he studied under Benjamin Graham, one of the most influential investors of his time, and Buffett learned a concept that would shape the rest of his life. Value. The idea that something can be worth more than what people are currently willing to pay for it. That sounds simple. But imagine looking at a company and seeing what everyone else sees. A stock price, a number moving up and down, people buying, people selling, people panicking, people celebrating. Buffett tried to look beyond that. He wanted to know what was actually underneath the number. What does the company own? How does it make money? Does it have a strong business? Can it survive difficult times? Can it continue making money years from now? That way of thinking changed everything, because suddenly investing wasn't just about watching numbers move. It was about owning pieces of real businesses. And that's when I started realizing something. The stock market wasn't the real story. The real story was patience. Buffett wasn't trying to become rich next month. He wasn't looking for some secret investment that would make him a fortune overnight. He was thinking in decades, and that's almost impossible for most people to do. We're constantly being told that we should get rich quickly. Everywhere I look, there's someone promising fast money, fast businesses, fast investments, fast success. But Buffett's strategy was almost the complete opposite. He understood that something incredibly powerful happens when you give money enough time to grow. It's called compound growth, and the easiest way I can explain it is with a snowball. Imagine I give you a tiny snowball. At first it barely looks like anything. You roll it across the snow, it picks up a little more. You keep rolling, it gets bigger. Now that bigger snowball can pick up even more snow. Then it gets even bigger, and the process continues. That's what compound growth can look like. The early progress doesn't seem impressive, but eventually, the growth starts building on itself. And that's what made Buffett's story so powerful. He didn't just make money, he kept the money working. Then the money made more money, then that money made even more, and he kept repeating the process for years, then decades, and eventually the results became enormous. But here's the part that really hit me. The biggest advantage Buffett had wasn't that he was a billionaire. It was that he started early and had time. Time is something we all have, but we don't all use it the same way. And when you're young, time feels unlimited. You think you have plenty of it. You think you'll start saving later. You'll start investing later. You'll learn that skill later. You'll learn that skill later. You'll build that business later. You'll get serious later. But later has a way of becoming years, and years have a way of becoming decades. That's why Buffett's story isn't really about what happened when he became a billionaire. It's about what happened before anyone cared. It's about all those years when his progress probably looked boring. It's about the small investments, the small businesses, the money he saved, the things he didn't buy, the opportunities he waited for. Nobody looks at a snowball when it's tiny and thinks it's going to become enormous, but that's exactly what happened. Buffett kept rolling. Eventually, one of the biggest chapters of the story began with Berkshire Hathaway. Today, Berkshire Hathaway is an enormous company, but that's not how it started. Berkshire Hathaway was originally a struggling textile business. Buffett bought into the company because he believed the stock was undervalued. But the business itself continued struggling, and Buffett later acknowledged that buying Berkshire Hathaway was a mistake. That part of the story matters to me because sometimes we look at successful people like they have some perfect record. They don't. Buffett made mistakes. He made investments that didn't work. He missed opportunities. He made decisions he later regretted. The difference wasn't that he never failed. The difference wasn't that he never failed. The difference was that failure didn't stop him. He learned, he adjusted, and he kept going. Eventually, Berkshire Hathaway became something completely different. Instead of being focused primarily on textiles, it became a vehicle through which Buffett and his team could invest in and acquire other businesses. And over time, those investments became incredibly valuable. But Buffett didn't suddenly become rich. His wealth grew over decades, and that distinction is important. Because when I see someone successful, it's easy to look at their current situation and compare it to where I am right now. But that's not a fair comparison. I'm looking at their result. I'm not looking at their process. I'm looking at their process. I'm looking at the house. I'm not looking at the years it took to afford it. I'm looking at the business. I'm not looking at all the failed ideas before it worked. I'm looking at the money. I'm not looking at all the discipline that came before it. And that's something I had to learn. Success is usually much slower than it looks from the outside. Buffett became extremely wealthy, but he didn't suddenly become a different person because his bank account changed. He continued living in Omaha. He continued living in the house he bought in 1958. Think about that. You become one of the richest people in the world. You have enough money to buy practically anything, and yet you continue living in the same house. That says something. It doesn't mean expensive things are bad. It doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy your money. It doesn't mean everyone should live like Warren Buffett. But it does show me that wealth and showing off wealth are two completely different things. And that's where social media can mess with our perception, because online, wealth is often presented as a lifestyle. The cars, the watches, the houses, the vacations, the designer clothes. Everything is designed to make you think the person has made it. But sometimes what you're seeing isn't wealth. You're seeing spending. Someone can look incredibly rich while being financially unstable, and someone else can look completely ordinary while quietly building a fortune. That's why I stopped asking myself whether someone looked rich. I started asking whether they actually had control over their money, because that's the part that matters. If I make $1,000 and spend every dollar, I haven't built wealth. If I make $1,000 and consistently keep part of it, save it, invest it, or use it to build something valuable, I've started building something. Maybe it's small, maybe it doesn't feel important, but it's a start. And that's the part of Buffett's story that I think matters most to people like me. Because most of us aren't starting with millions, we're starting with whatever we have. Maybe it's a few dollars, maybe it's a part-time job, maybe it's an idea, maybe it's a skill we're trying to learn. Maybe it's nothing more than the decision to stop wasting every opportunity we get. But you have to start somewhere. And Buffett didn't become Warren Buffett because he had billions sitting around waiting for him. He became Warren Buffett because he developed habits that allowed small amounts of money to grow, and then he gave those habits time. That's something I can actually understand. I can't relate to having billions, but I can relate to starting small. I can relate to wanting something better. I can relate to looking at someone successful and wondering how they got there. And maybe that's why Buffett's story matters, because the lesson isn't that I need to become a billionaire. The lesson is that I need to stop thinking that everything has to happen immediately. I don't need to become rich tomorrow. I need to become better than I was yesterday. I need to understand money better. I need to understand investing. I need to understand business. I need to learn how to control my spending. I need to learn how to make money without immediately getting rid of it. And most importantly, I need to understand that time is working whether I use it or not. That's the scary part. Time doesn't stop. If I spend the next 10 years doing nothing with my money, those 10 years are still going to pass. But if I spend those same 10 years learning, saving, investing, and building skills, I could be in a completely different position. And the same thing applies to you. Think about where you could be 10 years from now. Not because you're going to magically become a millionaire, but because 10 years of consistent decisions can completely change someone's life. The person who starts learning today has an advantage over the person who keeps saying they'll start tomorrow. The person who starts saving today has an advantage over the person who keeps spending everything. The person who learns how investing works has an advantage over the person who refuses to understand money. And the person who can wait has an advantage over the person who needs everything immediately. That last one might be the biggest, because patience is becoming rare. Everyone wants instant results, but the things that matter most usually take time. Building a business takes time. Building a career takes time. Building skills takes time. Building trust takes time. And building wealth takes time. There is no magical shortcut that replaces that. Buffett's story is proof of that. He spent decades doing something that probably felt incredibly boring at times. He read, he studied, he invested, he waited, he made mistakes. He learned, he continued. And then one day, people looked at the result and called him a genius. But they didn't see all the boring years. They didn't see the beginning. They didn't see them as small snowball. They only saw it after it became enormous. That's something I want to remember. Because sometimes I look at someone who's far ahead of me and wonder why I'm not there yet. But maybe the question shouldn't be why I'm not there yet. Maybe the question shouldn't be why I'm not there yet. Maybe the question should be whether I'm moving in the right direction. Because if I am, then I don't need everything to happen today. I just need to keep going. That's the difference between trying to get rich and actually building wealth. Trying to get rich makes you look for the fastest possible path. Building wealth makes you think about the strongest possible foundation. And I think that's what Buffett understood. He wasn't trying to impress the world. He was trying to build something that could survive the world. He wasn't trying to win every single day. He was trying to still be winning decades later. And maybe that's the mindset I need. Maybe that's the mindset we all need. Because money isn't really about the number in your bank account. It's about what that number allows you to do. It's about freedom. It's about having choices. It's about being able to handle an emergency without your entire life falling apart. It's about being able to take an opportunity when it comes. It's about not having to say yes to everything just because you need the money. That's real wealth. And the more I think about Buffett's life, the more I realize something. The richest person in the room isn't necessarily the person wearing the most expensive clothes. It isn't necessarily the person driving the most expensive car. It isn't necessarily the person posting the biggest house on social media. The richest person might be the person who has control over their money, control over their decisions, control over their future. And that's the kind of wealth I actually want. Because what good is having $1 million if you need to spend all of it to convince everyone that you're worth $1 million? What good is having an expensive car if you're terrified of losing your income? What good is looking successful if you're secretly drowning financially? I don't want to build a life that only looks successful. I want to build one that actually is. And that's the lesson I took from Warren Buffett. Don't spend your entire life trying to look rich. Spend your time becoming financially stronger. Don't obsess over getting rich overnight. Learn how money actually works. Don't compare your beginning to someone else's finish line. Remember that the person you admire may have spent decades getting where they are. And don't underestimate small beginnings, because the biggest fortunes in the world often started with something incredibly ordinary. A decision, a dollar, an idea, a habit, and then another, and another, and another, until eventually those small decisions became something much bigger. That's what happened to Warren Buffett, and that's what makes his story so powerful. He didn't need to win every day. He just needed to keep making good decisions for a very long time. And maybe that's what I need to do too. Maybe that's what you need to do. Because I don't know where I'm going to be 10 years from now. I don't know how much money I'll have. I don't know what opportunities will come my way. But I do know one thing. The decisions I make today are going to be part of the person I become tomorrow. And if I can learn to think long term, control my money, build valuable skills, and let time work for me instead of against me, then maybe I don't need to know exactly where I'll end up. I just need to make sure I'm moving in the right direction. Because Warren Buffett's story didn't begin with billions. It began with a kid who decided that money was worth understanding. Then he kept learning. He kept investing. He kept waiting. And he never stopped letting the snowball roll. Maybe that's the real secret. Not getting rich quickly. Getting started early enough. Staying disciplined enough. And being patient enough to let small things become big things. Because one day you might look back and realize that the decisions that felt insignificant at the time were actually the decisions that changed your entire life.